Hello there. What you see on your screen is an example of using the built-in conditional formatting feature to format the numbers in a particular column. In column C, what we've done is turned on conditional formatting so that any numbers that are less than $10,000 have a red background. And that is done through using the built-in conditional formatting that is found on the Home tab under Conditional Formatting, the Highlight Cells rules. Okay? And we use less than. Now, the question came up in class is it possible to highlight an entire row based on a value? And the answer is yes. And as I indicated in class, it was a little bit beyond the scope of what we were discussing. And so I'm recording this video so that you can understand the steps. Okay? Context for everybody else. My name is Jackie Chiatti. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and also I consult as an Excel data analyst. This is part of a course that I teach in Excel Fundamentals. It is a certification course, and in that course, it takes people who have zero knowledge of Excel and brings them up to a strong foundation where they learn the basics of Excel. So in this video, I'm going to be answering a question from that class, and I am going to be going a little bit slower and getting into a lot of detail because, again, this recording is for a basic Excel class. So feel free, if you're not in the class and you just want to learn how to conditionally format rows, feel free to speed up the video. Okay? So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the conditional formatting we already have applied. I will explain what it is we're about to do, building on what you've already learned in the Excel certification class about absolute versus relative references, and then we'll go ahead and actually do it. Okay, so step one, I'm going to go back to my Home tab. In the Styles group, I'm going to click Conditional Formatting, click Clear Rules, and just clear rules from the entire set. Pardon me, I misspoke. Clear rules from the entire sheet. All right, so let's discuss what we're going to be doing here. You've already learned about absolute reference, and you learned three ways to convert a relative reference, which is the Excel default, into an absolute reference. Hopefully you remember those three ways because they are going to be on the certification exam. Okay? But what I mentioned when we talked about absolute reference is that when you change your cell reference to an absolute reference, the dollar symbols indicate what is locked in. In this first example, in cell E2, what you're seeing here is that we have both the column and the row locked in because there's a dollar symbol before the column letter and a dollar symbol before the row number. Okay? Now, these next two examples are examples of what are called mixed references, where one or the other is locked in. In this first example, my column is locked in, but my row is not. So that means wherever I copy this formula from or this function from, if the row needs to adjust, it will, but it will always be looking at column C. Okay? And then this is our second mixed reference, where the column is allowed to adjust based on where we copy and paste this function of formula 2, but the row is going to stay in place. The row is locked in. Okay? So when we're applying conditional formatting to an entire row, what we do is we select the entire area, ignoring the headings, and then we create a formula, a function that starts off with the first cell. Okay, so let's say we were to format this to say if the total is less than 10,000, we want to highlight the entire row in red. Okay, so the first thing we did was select the entire area, so that says the entire row would be highlighted as opposed to just something in column C. So that's the first step. Now, the second thing we need to do is create a formula or function referencing the very first cell in our range that we are testing. So what is the very first cell in our range we're testing? Is cell C2, right? So what we want to do is we want to go for row 2, take a look at what's in column C. If it's less than 10,000, highlight it in red. Then go to row 3 and do the same test, and row 4 and do the same test, and so forth and so on until we go through this entire data set. So the very first cell in our range is cell C2, okay? With that, we know our formula is going to be C2 less than 1,000, okay? So now we have our first cell. We've put it in the formula that we're going to be using to set our conditional formatting. And then the last question we ask is what changes? What stays locked in and what changes? Well, if you think about what we're trying to do is we're going to stay in column C. We're just moving down row by row. And so that tells you that column C needs to be locked in, but the row number needs to adjust. So the column needs to be the absolute reference. The row needs to be the relative reference. And how do we indicate that again? We put a dollar symbol before what we want to lock in. And as a result, it's going to be dollar symbol C and then 2, because the row is not locked in because the row adjusts. All right? So now that we know what we're going to be doing, let's go ahead and do this. We have the entire area highlighted. We're going to click conditional formatting. We are going to go to new rule because we're going to have to create this rule manually. Okay? So new rule. And then here we want to select this last option. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. Okay, so we're going to say equal. And then rather than typing in the cell reference, I always tell you in this class, avoid typing cell references whenever possible. Always select the cell. So it's equal, and then I'm going to click the very first cell we want to test. So I'm going to click cell C2. Okay, and then I'm going to leave both the column and the row locked in for now and just complete my formula. So it's equal C2 less than 10,000. Okay, now I can just use my mouse to click to figure out which of these I need to convert to a relative reference. So we've already determined that we want to lock it into the column, but we want to move it over for the row. Okay, so instead of actually correcting this, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to apply the formula, and I'm going to show you what happens when you don't do this correctly. Then we're going to get back in here and we're going to modify, we're going to edit the conditional formatting so that it's correct. But you already know that what we want to end up with is we want to end up with equal dollar symbol C2, where we lock in the column, but we allow the row to move. Okay, so now that we have absolute reference for both the column and the row, we know this is wrong. We're going to see what happens when we do it the wrong way and then come back and correct it. So I'm going to go to Format. I'm going to select Fill. And I think I'll just make it kind of like in little orangey fill. Okay, so when I click what I want, you see here it gives me a sample. If I wanted to also make changes to the font, I could click the font tab and set it as bold or italics or regular or whatever, right? And again, I came to the fill and I set the fill. Now, these options here are very similar to the formatting options we discussed earlier in the class, where we talked about using the Control-1 shortcut to see the window of possible formatting options. So a lot of these should be familiar to you already. Again, I could come to font. I could set here the font style. I could set the color and add some effects to it, but we're going to leave all of that alone. So I'm going to click OK and then click OK again. And you see nothing here changed because all it's doing is formatting this entire area based on what's in this particular cell. So let's convert this first cell. Let's make it a value that's less than 10,000. Now you see the entire area is shaded. And the reason is because we use the absolute reference where we locked in the column and the row when we set up our conditional formatting, it just bases how it formats this entire area based on the value of this one cell. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to go in and correct our conditional formatting formula, and you will see how it changes this. So we're going to go to conditional formatting, click on manage rules. This is the only rule I have, so I'm going to select it and click edit rule. And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the dollar symbol next to row number. So I'm going to remove the dollar symbol that's right over 2, just locking in the column. And then I'm going to click OK and click OK again. And now you see that only the rows that meet that criteria end up being highlighted. I wanted to show you what happens when you do it the wrong way versus when you do it the correct way, because when I teach this, sometimes people make that mistake that I showed you, and then they wonder why, either they have no formatting or every single thing is formatted. So I wanted to show you wrong versus correct so that if you stumble across this in real life, you know how to correct it. The other thing I want to mention is that it is also possible to apply this conditional formatting to rows where you're even doing things like looking at dates, which is great if you have some kind of tracking sheet. So for example, you could say, format this row if it's an upcoming date, an upcoming deadline within the next 7 days, I want it to have certain formatting, right? If it's a day in the past, I want it to format a certain way. And what that does when you have tracking sheets is it enables you to open up your tracking sheet, especially you have something where you're tracking projects or deadlines, and immediately see what's coming up, what's already passed, right? So that you can kind of govern your activities accordingly. If that's something you're interested in learning how to do, that is something we cover in the logical functions webinar series, right? Where we talk about if functions, and functions, or functions. Being able to format your rows based on dates is a concept that we cover in that series. I hope this was helpful. If you find this kind of information helpful, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening and have a great rest of your day.